Following upon the early successes of the 1825 Stockton and Darlington Railway and the 1830 Liverpool and Manchester, railways spread rapidly throughout Britain. However, not for another 20 years, until 1850 was Dumfries linked to Glasgow by the Glasgow, Dumfries and Carlisle Railway, which immediately amalgamated with the Glasgow, Paisley, Kilmarnock and Ayr to form the Glasgow and South Western Railway. 6 years later, an Act of Parliament authorised the building of a line from Castle Douglas to Dumfries, which would link up with the Glasgow and South Western to connect to the growing national network. Many people who know Dumfries today as a local station handling a limited stopping train service will be surprised to learn that it was for many years a major railway centre with its own engine sheds, coaling and watering facilities, catering for through Anglo-Scottish expresses, as well as a heavy freight traffic. As well as the old South Western main line, it served a route to Lockerbie via Loch Maben and an extensive route mileage to the west to the major ferry port of Stranraer, as well as branches to Kirkcudbright, to Wigtown, Garliston and Whithorn on the Wigtonshire Peninsula, and to the farthest western extremity at Port Patrick on the Galloway coast. When first built, Dumfries Station was outside the town. Hard to believe nowadays, when development along the Edinburgh Road continues for some 3 miles beyond the station. This view shows the station in the days before the motor car became universal. Trains for Castle Douglas and beyond would depart from the now closed and infilled Bay platform. In 1859, this octagonal tower was built to signal the junction of the Castle Douglas and main Glasgow lines. Signalling was by means of flags displayed at different heights. Although the flags were soon replaced by semaphores, the tower itself was removed from the junction and placed immediately north of the station, where it remained until demolition in the 1970s. The entire route from Dumfries to Stranraer was a victim of the Beeching Axe and closed in June 1965. However, ICI had a substantial factory manufacturing plastics at Cargan Bridge, some 3 or 4 miles from the South Western main line, and a short rump was retained to serve this facility. This short section of track was finally closed in 1990, and only the briefest of stumps now remains. Almost immediately after leaving the main line, the track crossed the River Nith on a substantial viaduct, which is now a public footpath. Here at the bridge, another form of transport is celebrated. For the bicycle was invented by the blacksmith at Keir village, a few miles away, around 1839. In 1842, he rode his machine the 68 miles over the Lowther Hills to Glasgow, where he was arrested for furious riding and fined 5 shillings. Shortly after crossing the river, we come across a classic railway structure, the supports for a water tank. Carnation, the tinned milk people, had a factory in Dumfries, which was one of the town's major employers, and had its own sidings on the Port Road. Sadly, its closure was announced in 1992. An industrial and retail estate now occupies the site. Beyond the Carnation factory, the line passed under an ancient roadway. The new Dumfries bypass severed this route in 1990, and today it carries a footpath and cycle track. In the distance beyond it, we can see the A76 Glasgow Road. As we pass under the A76, a look at the bridge from the trackbed shows how the road has developed from its narrow original form to the much wider carriageway familiar to the locals today. When the line was built, this was all open countryside, but today it has been swallowed up by suburbia. As we pass underneath the Hardthorn Road, we notice the old smoke deflectors which remain in place, intended to minimise any damage caused by locomotive exhaust to the pipework above. The track continues to the road leading to the village of Turregles, and here we reach Maxwell Town, the first station along the line. Maxwell Town today is simply a suburb of Dumfries, but until 1929 it was a separate borough. The old map clearly shows that the station was scarcely conveniently placed, and it closed to passengers in March 1939. Part of the old platform is still visible to walkers today. As we continue along the track, we cross the old A75 main road from the Anglo-Scottish border at Gretna Green to Stranraer. In days gone by, this would have been very busy indeed, but the opening of the Dumfries bypass in 1990 has left it much quieter. Now we cross the Cargan Water, before catching our first glimpse of the Cargan Bridge Industrial Estate on the site of the old ICI factory. The original factory was built in 1938 to 39 to produce high explosives. After the war, a new factory was constructed to manufacture a synthetic fibre from groundnut waste, but this was eventually converted to produce plastic film. The site was approached by the 8-arch Garach Viaduct before freight trains had to reverse into the works sidings. Everything west of here closed in 1965, but the track remained open until 2002 to service the factory. At Drumsleet, immediately beyond the industrial complex, we cross the old military road built by General Wade's successor, Major William Caulfield, in the 1760s. It ran from the border near Gretna to Port Patrick, the same general route as the Port Road Railway. Ever since leaving the southwestern main line, we have been climbing steadily, and now, as we approach the high ground to the west of Dumfries, we cross the viaduct at Goldie Lee. Goldilea House has an interesting history, with connections to Robert Burns, and having been a principal base of the Norwegian army during the Second World War. Today, it's a care home situated in a valley crossed by an 18-arch double-tracked viaduct 92 feet high. Access to the viaduct today is securely barred. Beyond the viaduct was the climb at 1 in 73 for a mile or more through the long wood at the northern edge of Maybe Forest, a fire hazard in dry summers. Parts of the track bed are walkable today, although some stretches are completely overgrown. Clearly, this was a challenging stretch for steam locomotives. At the top of the climb was Lochenhead Station, the highest point between Dumfries and Castle Douglas, and serving nowhere in particular. The road bridge in the old photographs still exists today and has survived despite the attempts by Highways England to have it infilled. Yes, I know we're in Scotland, but it seems that the threat emanates from an English body. Little remains of Lochenhead Station, but its site is clearly visible from the air. The track now continues to the west through gently undulating farmland. The next station along the line was Killyhuan, which also served the village of Beeswing, visible in the distance on the A711 Dumfries to Dalbeattie road. Part of the westbound platform remains, but the present occupier of the old station house has extended the building out towards the platform edge. Beyond Killyhuan, much of the trackbed has been infilled. A little farther on, the route crosses a track which, in the pre-motor age, must have been quite an important way for locals, but has now fallen into disuse, except for a few walkers and their dogs. It's easy to forget, in these days of automatic barriers at level crossings, that for much of the railway's history, each crossing had to be manually operated. The ruins of the keeper's cottage still stand beside the trackbed here at Blair Shinnock. And here at Blair Shinnock, the railway crossed over the Cogunion Lane. In southwest Scotland, a lane is a narrow stream, a usage of the word not encountered elsewhere. We will cross Cogunion Lane again before long. Nearby is Drumcoltron Tower, a tower house dating from the 1550s, and owned by a minor branch of the Maxwell family, a very important clan in this part of Scotland. Remember Maxwell Town? Continuing west, the bridge over the track at Drumjohn is in fine fettle. But there's little evidence of the trackbed as we look east to Dumfries. Westward, we can see where the trains ran. We now reach Caergonion Station, currently occupied by a holiday caravan site. The station house is now a private dwelling. A new road into the village has been provided by filling in the trackbed, but the original route is visible beside the house to the right, and the old road bridge still exists. Caergonion village, half a mile or so from the station, has changed little over the years. And now the track continues to the west, and we can see where it crossed the A711 Dalbeattie Road. The old trackbed is still visible, if less obviously so, as we proceed further into Galloway and head towards the next station, the most isolated and apparently pointless along this section of the Port Road. When built, Southwark Station was in the middle of nowhere without even a road leading to it, and the situation is much the same today. And yet, in 1910, it booked 6,300 passengers. Where did they come from? It was closed to passengers in 1939, as was its signal box. Ruins of the old station buildings can just about be found among the overgrown wilderness today. In 1941, however, a new explosives factory was opened on land to the west of the station, which was reopened to accommodate the workforce. After the war, this traffic disappeared, but curiously, by 1965, this isolated station was the only one remaining open between Dumfries and Dalbeattie, handling just one stopping train daily in each direction. The ruins of the old ordnance factory are used today by the police and the armed forces for urban warfare training, and public access is strongly discouraged. The factory made extensive use of the railway, and some very dangerous loads must have been carried. Now we have to cross Caergonion Lane once again to access Edingham Moss on the opposite side. Edingham Moss presented the railway builders with a serious headache. Anything they tried to lay on its surface simply sank into the ground and disappeared. George Stephenson famously faced the same problem at Chatmoss when building the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and his solution was adopted here. The railway was laid on a floating raft of timber, which continued to give excellent service for as long as the line remained in use. Another part of the munitions factory was built on the Edingham side, sufficiently distant from the eastern section to prevent any catastrophic event occurring in one part of the establishment destroying the entire site. A modern industrial site now occupies the westernmost part of the Edingham complex. As the train leaves the vast Edingham site, we have the wonderful contrast between the 20th century munitions factory and the 16th century Edingham Castle. Warfare through the ages. As we cast our eyes to the west, the town of Dalbeattie awaits us, with a distant view of the Galloway Hills. This early Ordnance Survey map clearly shows how the railway was built on the northern edge of Dalbeattie. The contemporary map shows how the town has developed since 1965. Although the original route shows up quite clearly in print, it's not easy to find it on the ground, and other than some bridge parapets, few remnants are accessible. Here is the old Dumfries to Dalbeattie road in days of yore. And here is the same spot, now the A711, in the year 2022. Clearly, those calling for the reinstatement of the railway line will find some serious obstacles in their path. With the aid of an Ordnance Survey map, it's possible to find the last few remnants of the old route, but most of it has been built upon. This was the railway's approach to Dalbeattie station. And this is what occupies the site today. In the distance we can see the Solway Firth, though this would not be visible at ground level. As the line leaves Dalbeattie to head north into the picturesque valley of the Water. Across the valley we see another tower house, Buttle Castle, dating from 1170. Originally the seat of the powerful Lords of Galloway, now open to the public and offering accommodation. Water was crossed by an impressive steel girder viaduct, whose supporting stumps remain on site today. Now we're round Barscone Hill to head west towards Castle Douglas. Around the corner, the local farmers of the Buttle area were loud and persistent in demanding both a goods siding and a passenger station, each of which was eventually provided by the railway. Trains only called here on Wednesdays to carry them to the weekly market at Dumfries. When the line was doubled in 1894, the station closed and was demolished. The siding had been lifted 20 years previously. Little remains today. But is this the last remnant of an ancient wooden sleeper which I stumbled upon among the mud and rubble on the old platform site? The road bridge was finally removed in 1994. Beyond Butel, the line passed by Halkett-Leith's mill. The mill was still active when the railway was built, but the old mill building is now part of the Halkett-Leith farm. The trackbed, however, is still clearly visible in both directions from the nearby road bridge. As we head toward our destination of Castle Douglas, we see how the old road from Dalbeattie, now the A745, has been diverted to take over the old railway track. Clearly, this represents a great improvement for the motorist, but renders any future reinstallation of the railway even more problematic. The road swings away to the left, where the railway ran straight ahead. The widening approach through the old goods yard is clearly visible, whilst the passenger station occupied the site of the prominent white building, the Castle Douglas Tesco superstore. The goods yard is yet another industrial site, but at least one building obviously had railway origins. And so to the town's railway station, our final destination in this volume, seen here in the 1920s and in 1961. Bradshaw's guide for 1922 shows 10 trains daily from Dumfries to Castle Douglas, 11 on Saturday but only 1 on Sunday. 2 of them ran in the wee small hours to connect with the Irish mail sailing from Stranraer Harbour. All of the weekday trains appear to continue to either Stranraer town or to Kirkcudbright. Here at the station the route split. The line had been doubled all the way from Dumfries, but both the main line to Stranraer and the branch to Kirkcudbright were single track. We can clearly see where the old bridge carrying the main A75 road has been infilled. The footpath here occupies the old Kirkcudbright trackbed, whilst this footpath is more or less on the old Stranraer route. The Castle Douglas and Dumfries Railway was absorbed by the Glasgow and South Western in 1865, just 6 years after opening, with running powers granted to the Caledonian Railway. With the grouping of 1923, it became part of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway before being nationalised in 1948 to become part of British Railways. For several years now, there has been an active campaign to reopen the line, but we have seen all too clearly just how much of the route has been overbuilt. We cannot forget just how sparsely populated the southwest of Scotland is, and must also remember that the last ferry sailed from Stranraer in November 2011. Realistically, would you bet on the campaign succeeding?